You're listening to Asheville FM at WSFM LP 103.3 Asheville. This is the Asheville FM News Hour. I'm News Team Correspondent Emma Hutchens, and today I'm joined in the studio by Priya Ray. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Priya, could you introduce yourself and talk about what you're working on these days?
Sure thing. My name is Priya Ray, and I just started this nonprofit group called DIYabled. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm in this band called Cream Electric Santa that I started with my partner about almost 30 years ago. And about 20 years ago, I had a spinal injury. I fell, I hurt myself, and I became paralyzed. But I decided I wanted to keep playing music in the way I did, which was in a DIY format, which is doing it yourself, bypassing the corporate structure and, through community that I had created, almost my entire life. I wanted to continue doing that. So I started with my partner, Robert. We worked hard. We moved out to LA. We got our band together. And we were finally able to play and tour and do stuff. But I started realizing as I went into that world how inaccessible it was and how I just didn't really realize because I wasn't disabled. So I just decided I need to let people know because, DIY is about community. And if you just if you don't include disabled people in your community, they feel isolated, they get depressed, and they can add things to your community that, they have a different perspective on the world that they could add to your community. So I think it's really important to include people with disabilities. So I decided to start DIYabled, which is our goal is to educate people and to let people know about the rights of people living with disabilities and also educate about disability.
When did you start this project?
I started DIYable a couple of years ago, but it wasn't till around, I would say in the last year that I decided I wanted to turn it into into a nonprofit and talk to people and let people know. And eventually what I want to do is go to schools and talk to kids because I feel as adults, a lot of people aren't really informed about things like the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, and other things that support people with disabilities in the world to, do what everybody else does. And I feel like the way to teach is to start from childhood, and so it's just ingrained in kids.
From your experience in the DIY music scene, what are some very basic things that could be done for spaces and events to be more accessible?
Well, the first thing, of course, is if you have house shows, there's always stairs. So that's always for me, that's a total obstacle, but not for every disabled person. But I think the most important thing is to put a contact information and maybe give a person a clue of what your space is like. If it's ADA accessible, that means it complies completely with the ADA rules, and you can go to ada.gov and find out those rules. And then if it's an ADA friendly space, that means a person can get in, so it's probably no stairs. They can get in, it's flat. They can see a show and leave, but they might not be able to use the bathroom or get into other parts of the space because it's not accessible. And then there's just a place that's not accessible. But even if a place isn't accessible, people with disabilities figure out ways to get into places. So you should always have a contact information because then a person can call and say, hey, you say your place is not accessible, but I want to know a little bit more about what the setup is because I really like to go to this. So I think that's the way to include people with disabilities is by letting them be able to contact you and find out what your DIY space is like. And then, people open DIY spaces, if you have stairs, figure out a ramp, you can make it. It doesn't have to be ADA compliant. It just needs to work so people can get in. And so, I think people get a little intimidated because they want to follow these ADA rules, but you don't necessarily, that's for federal buildings and work offices. But in DIY spaces, you just do what you can, basically.
That's awesome. That's great advice. From your opinion, is this something that's getting more attention, that's becoming easier with time?
I don't really specifically know if it's getting easier from my perspective because, there's a lot of things like I don't really go to big festivals. Like I don't like to go to music events that have hundreds and hundreds of people. It's just too much for me, too much to be like, hey, can you get out of my way? It's like I just rather go to smaller shows where I can get up to the front and see the band. So, as far as festivals, they should be accessible because they're so big and they're charging money, but a lot of times they aren't. So I'm not really sure about that. But what I have seen is a lot of people in the DIY community that have disabilities talking about it, making zines about it, and demanding that they be paid attention to. So that's something that I've seen that I really like a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you have information and zines that you make available to the community. Can you talk about what those are about?
Yeah. Currently, I have 2 zines I made. One is about accessible parking. It's a guide to accessible parking. And then another one is the DIY community and accessibility. And it basically has, the pointers that I talked about, like what you can do to include people with disabilities in your space. So I have that. And then this girl, Osa Atoy, God, I don't remember how to say her last name. Sorry, Osa. Basically, she did a zine about me called Violins Aren't Punk, because I play violin in a punk band. I'm not into labels, so I don't know what to call my band, but I play violin, and she did an interview about why I play violin, kind of a history about my band and the 80s and 90s punk scene in Miami, where we're from originally, and why I started DIYabled. So, and these are all available at Firestorm, so if you want to check those out, check it out.
And then you also have these really cool signs.
Yeah, so I work with this group from Portland. They're called Nasty Women Get Something Done. It's a swear word, so I'm not going to say that, but you can go look them up. I think they're they go by the anagram, so I can't remember what the anagram is, but Nasty Women Get S Done. So .org, and they basically started their group right before the 2016 election happened, and it was kind of a response to what was being said about Elizabeth Warren at the time, about not being persistent and stuff like that. So they decided to make these signs called In Our America, or this artwork, and they put it on everything, but they have signs that can be in your yard or window or on your wall. And they also, on their site, they have stickers and stuff like that. And what they do is they raise money for other nonprofits that are smaller and donate money to them. And they do these fundraising programs where I get the sign and I try to sell it and raise money for DIYabled.
Awesome.
Yes.
It's a really beautiful sign.
It is. It's a beautiful. I love the sign. So.
Do you want to say what it says?
Yes, it's an American flag, and where the stars are, it says "In Our America," and then it says "All people are equal" on one stripe, on the top red stripe, and then on the next stripe it says "Love wins." Then the next stripe says "Black Lives Matter." Then it says "Immigrants and refugees are all welcome. Disabilities are respected. Women are in charge of their bodies," which is, of course, a very important statement at this moment in time. And then
people and planet are valued over profit.
Yes, and diversity is celebrated. So that's what it says on the sign. And the goal of Nasty Women Get Something Done is to the people that represent those tenements on this flag will, they donate money to those organizations.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a really great cause, so.
Well, I know that you have a show coming up and a benefit coming up, but before we get into that, I'm curious to hear what you're up to as a musician these days.
Oh, as a musician. Well, we are looking for a drummer. So that's what we're doing, but we're just trying to I've been focusing more on DIYabled, like music. I mean, I love playing music, but I haven't been as in that mind space lately. But, I'm always going to be doing Cream Electric Santa till the day I die, basically. And I don't know. I like to play experimental music. I'm kind of messing around with electronics and learning it because it's a whole different world than I'm used to. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just exploring and trying to come up with new things to do.
Great. Well, let's talk about what's coming up for you then.
Okay, cool. Well, the first thing I'll be doing is DIYabled benefit at Fleetwood's, and what we'll be doing there is I'll talk a little bit about what I talked here today at that space, and Cruckle and Woe are going to play, and maybe one other person, and there'll be music and food. I'm not sure if everyone remembers the Mad Scientist Bistro, but Robert made some food a really long time ago, so he's gonna make this butternut squash stew. I kind of want it to be about community. We want to just sit there, and I'm gonna talk to people about it, and have people donate for the to DIYable for the food and the signs, and we're just gonna sit and talk and kind of I don't know, be compassionate to each other, because I think it's really important at this time to have, a community and talk to each other and talk about what we're seeing and not be alone through it. So that's kind of my goal with the DIYabled
Awesome. And
benefit.
that's October 10th at Fleetwood's from 6 to 10.
Yeah. And then my band, Cream Electric Santa, will be playing at the Mothlight to October 24th. And I'll be also selling the DIYabled stuff there. And also at every event, I will be registering people to vote, because we really need to represent ourselves. And the smartest way to do that is to vote. So everyone needs to vote. So register, and I will help you do that.
Awesome. Well, if people want to learn more about the work that you do or support your programs, where can they do that? How can they do that?
Well, I have a website. It's called DIYabled.com, and you can go to that website, and I write about disability, and I'm gonna add more content, but right now I have these signs available in different zines, so you can go there and donate, and if you want any of the stuff I have on the site, of course you can have it. That's what I do on the site. I kind of write about different subjects. My last thing was about invisible disability, which is disabilities people can't really see. I don't have one, obviously, because I'm in a wheelchair, but there are a lot of people in the disabled community that you wouldn't really know they're disabled just by looking at them. So that's a really important issue in the disabled community.
Is there anything else you want people to know while we're here together?
No, I just really want people to vote and be really conscientious about the choices they're making in their life, because it's such an important time to be doing that. And that's pretty much it. And I want everyone to have fun too. I don't want you to all sit around depressed in your house, but be conscientious while you're having a good time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Priya, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. And
no problem.
We'll see you at the benefit.
Yes. Awesome. Yay.